Okay, so so yes, the first point is that drone strikes are killing civilians, which is obviously an issue. Some statistics that have already been stated, but I'd just like to reiterate. In Pakistan alone, it has been reported that these strikes resulted in between 2,500 to 2,524 deaths to 3,247 deaths, and including 482 to 852 civilian casualties, and an additional 1,200 to 1,300 injured. Those statistics are from the Bureau of Investigative Journalism. So Michael said that we are at war, and so that justifies civilian deaths, because in past wars we have killed civilians. I would like to say that this is not a war that is like other wars that we've had in the past. This is a quote that I found from American Drone Wars. The United States is engaged in an armed conflict between itself and various individuals and organizations that gave a right to the United States to use self-defense against these individuals. And this is used to justify killing individuals that are alleged to be enemies of the United States, even if they're in territories of states that are not at war with the United States. And they may also argue that technology is becoming more advanced, so that these massive bombs that are being dropped on all of these facilities are more accurate to kill the high-value targets, so that they're not taking out as many low-value or civilians. But a highly accurate laser-guided 500-pound bomb is still a 500-pound bomb, and it can create a blast radius of 100 to 200 feet, depending on where it's detonated. Also, Americans have been killed as a result of these drone strikes. There's an example of Kamal Derwish. In 2002, Kamal Derwish, who was an American of Yemeni background, was in Yemen, and he happened to be in a vehicle with with someone that they were trying to kill, to get rid of. They didn't know that Kamal Derwish was in the vehicle with him. And he was killed by a missile from a Predator drone. So this also raises the question, is the government allowed to use military force to kill U.S. civilians with no judicial process? They've obviously received backlash from many Americans for the murder of this individual, but they kind of disregarded it, as they have with many of the drone killings. And one reason that the U.S. has been so successful in spinning the numbers of civilian casualties is that they've adopted this controversial method of counting many civilians as militants, which systematically underestimates civilian casualties greatly. So they'll say that this many civilians died, but that's because they're saying that all these civilians are militants, which is not the case mostly. And according to a report in the New York Times, the U.S. reports all military-aged males in a strike zone as militants unless clear evidence to the contrary emerges after the attack. So that is the qualifications of what they have to label someone as a militant, is if they're a military-aged individual that's hanging out around an area that has known militants to be in it. I would like to also add that bin Laden actually, during the bin Laden raid, we also realized that many of these terrorists or militants live with their families and have interactions with a range of actors. Shopkeepers, suppliers, drivers who are innocent but have fairly regular contact with them. So presuming that we bomb these targets trying to kill terrorists, and these terrorists are living with many innocent people. They're surrounded by innocent people. And because there's still going to be people that have their shops trying to make a living, that are living in the areas with these terrorists, and it's just unfortunate they probably don't have the money to get out of the area that they're in to give themselves a better lives. And we are basically bombing them, and presuming that they are guilty by association violates the principle of non-combatant immunity that lies at the heart of international humanitarian law that I know Michael said that drone striking does not break humanitarian law, but when you're presuming that people are guilty by associate, that in fact does violate humanitarian law. So the second point is that it creates more terrorists. David Rode was captured by the Taliban and told Reuters, a news agency, that the drones were terrifying. From the ground, it is impossible to determine who or what they are tracking as they circle overhead. He was an American that was captured and was in an area where drones were flying overhead, and so he gave us kind of an idea of what it was like in his article about what it's like to live where terrorists are roaming constantly. And so, Michael also said that drone strikes lowered the terrorist attacks. A graph that I saw shows that in 2002, we struck Yemen once, and there were 3 terrorist attacks in Yemen. There weren't very many drone strikes in that time, all the way until 2011 when we started upping it, especially because of the Obama administration. So in 2011, 10 drone strikes were recorded in Yemen, and still only 3 terrorist attacks were recorded. In 2012, 41 drone strikes were recorded in Yemen, and the terrorist attacks in Yemen up to 23. And in 2013, we lowered our drone strikes to 26, but 27 terrorist attacks were recorded in Yemen. So by those numbers, you can see that as the drone strikes are increasing proportionally, the terrorist attacks are indeed increasing in Yemen. Yeah, and these new combatants, these people that are pissed off at the United States, they can't actually fly over and attack the United States. So much of these retaliation attacks happen in Yemen. These new combatants are unable to retaliate, so they cross the border into Afghanistan where U.S. troops and NATO and Afghan security forces are concentrated and present easily identifiable targets. Or they may join the ranks of groups like Pakistan Taliban, whose attacks within Pakistan destabilize the U.S.-Pakistani alliance. That phenomenon is stated by David Kilcullen as accidental guerrilla phenomenon, and much of these terrorist attacks we never know about because they're not, the Paris attack was obviously documented and shown all over the news, but we mostly don't hear of all these many terrorist attacks happening every day out in the Middle East. And I guess that is all. I'm out of time.